Hail and well met adventurers, I'm your host the Dungeon Master, and I'm proud to bid you welcome to a brand new Let's Play. With the conclusion of Final Fantasy II, at long last, the road to 7 will continue with my Let's Play of the next chapter in the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy III, released in 1990 for the NES in Japan. Now, Final Fantasy III wouldn't have a localized release until quite a long time afterwards, in the form of the Nintendo DS version, which actually retconned a lot of details from the NES version and added a lot of character development and complexity in layers that wasn't readily available in the original. And here in this menu here, we're greeted with the classic iconic Final Fantasy theme, as always. We're going to leave message speed 6 on default because that works. There's no real reason to change it. And if we already had a saved game, we could select one of the save files here, of which there are 3, but there aren't. So without further ado, well, before we start a new game, you may have noticed 2 things. First, the intro video that was uploaded before this one, before this first episode. That is from the Nintendo DS version, and it is incredibly spectacular. As to why I'm not playing that version, 2 reasons: because I've already played the first 2 Final Fantasies for the NES, and so I feel it fitting to wrap up the classic era of Final Fantasy with the original version of Final Fantasy III. Also is the fact that I can't really emulate the Nintendo DS well enough anyway, so that was the other reason why I decided to do the original versions of Final Fantasy first, rather than their remade or updated counterparts. Even though Final Fantasy 3DS is a breathtakingly spectacular game, especially where the cutscenes are concerned, as evidenced by that intro video. But, well, that's enough rambling. So without further ado, let us enter the world of Final Fantasy III and see exactly just what it is we've gotten ourselves into. And fair warning, we're not the only ones. Well actually, we have to name our respective party members, of which there are 4. As you all saw in the little prophecy text, which is also fairly reminiscent of the classic Final Fantasy era of the NES era. The reason why I didn't talk through that was that the text was scrolling so fast that there was absolutely no time for me to read it by the time we actually got to the end of it. Now, in the NES version of Final Fantasy III, the main characters are essentially nameless and characterless. You can basically customize them to pretty much however you want, and that will actually have a greater effect in Final Fantasy III than first meets the eye. But that will come later. Now, our 4 characters, of whom they are all orphans, they're actually in a very specific order from start to finish. Now this iconic little cherub here in the white and red armor, I'm actually going to, for the sake of this Let's Play, I'm actually going to try and weave together both the NES and the DS versions of Final Fantasy III. Which means that this main character here, this first main character, is actually going to be called by the name that he is given in the DS version, which is Luneth. Which, believe it or not, is actually a girl's name, which is given to a boy, but that's just the way it turned out in the DS version. And I'll read his character description. An orphan raised by Nina and elder Topapa in the village of Adventurous by nature, his curiosity gets the better of him as he tumbles into a hole created by the great earthquake, which should probably give you a hint as to how this adventure is going to start. The second character is another orphan raised in by the elder Topapa. He is Luneth's best friend, Ark. Another orphan raised by Topapa and Luneth's best friend. Unlike Luneth, he prefers reading over gamboling in the wild. His studies endow him with great knowledge that more than makes up for his shyness. Now our third character. Now, the other thing to note is that all four of these default characters in the NES version of Final Fantasy III are in fact all boys. But in the DS version, they decided to change that a bit with this third character, who is known as Rafia in the DS version, who is a girl, obviously. Seems I can, Have I missed something here? I seem to have, Oh no, I wondered what happened there. I just scrolled down the screen. Weird, as I was wondering where certain letters were. My mistake. Wasn't paying enough attention there. Anyway, Rafia's backstory is thus. Raised in Kazuas by the mithril smith Taka, whose rigorous training led her to run away from home. Ellipses again. More than once, it seems. And rounding out the party is, well, a very reliable character by the name of Ingus. Final party member. A loyal soldier of King Susune's army, he narrowly escaped the Jin's curse. His prime concern is finding the missing Princess Sarah. A little bit of foreshadowing in Final Fantasy III, which will go into greater detail over the course of this Let's Play adventure. With our final character named, they just fall down the hole. Like so. Because that's how this adventure starts. Yep, thanks to Luneth, we've all fallen into a pit. Although the difference between this and the DS version is that Luneth actually is all by himself. Ark is in the village, and Rafia and Ingus have yet to be properly encountered. Whereas in the NES version, all four characters are basically present and correct. Luneth is basically the leader here, and just listen to that cave music. Yeah, when they remade the game for the DS, they remixed the music of Final Fantasy III, which I have to say they did an absolutely fantastic, exquisite job. Once again, courtesy of Nobuo Uematsu, ladies and gentlemen. Seems like we're all arguing amongst ourselves, but, well, we have to get ourselves out of this predicament. We can't go out this way, so we have to go forward. And in typical Final Fantasy fashion, our very first enemies are goblins. Also, this battle music is extremely catchy, to say the least, and you'll also notice that graphically, for the first time, we have the iconic blue of Final Fantasy, as opposed to the sorry about that. Had to step away from the episode there for a brief moment, but yeah, you'll see that instead of the static black of the previous Final Fantasies, we now have the menu of the iconic blue Final Fantasy menu in the battle screen. And I have to say that the appearances of these goblins is actually probably the best in the NES era, compared to the imps of Final Fantasy and the goblins of Final Fantasy II, which were kind of fairly wispy sprites. Another thing that you'll note is that I haven't paused the game as such. Whenever a battle begins, yeah, it actually gives you time to assess the situation, and then the moment you press a button, the command menu comes up. We have 4 commands as usual: fight, defend, run, and item. Don't have any magic at the moment. We don't get that until much later. We all have the exact same health. And we currently don't have any items on us per se, but they've actually improved a lot from Final Fantasy II, especially where the inventory is concerned. Oh man. Even though a limited inventory was probably more realistic for an RPG of Final Fantasy II's caliber, I am actually glad to have a more stockier inventory as well. And just like the goblins, we ourselves are armed pretty much with knives, and we can fight our way out of this battle. But we're going to have to if we're going to get past these goblins at any rate. Now, since Lunith has been allocated an attack, you see over that particular goblin the number 1 flashing. I believe this was designed so that it allows you to know which party member is attacking which enemy. Although, having played through the first 2 Final Fantasies, I actually have no such problem in knowing whom I'm attacking and when. But if we have Arc Attack, you'll now see that it's showing that he's attacking that goblin over there. And we'll pretty much attack a goblin each. And now they've got the first strike, but there goes one goblin. Arc is taking quite a bit of damage. Well, we've dealt damage to 2 of them, 3 of them now, and 1 more. Victory is ours, and the classic music. With a slightly catchy, upbeat feel to it this time. Which I find quite very lively. We got 12 gil from them. And we also got 2 capacity. Now what is capacity? Well, we'll explain that much later. Let's just say it's unique to Final Fantasy III. And we get 16 experience, that's right. The character leveling in Final Fantasy III has been overhauled yet again from how it was in Final Fantasy II. So we've got the classic character experience, everyone levels up. So we're now level 2. And that was the first time that the 4 of us have encountered those goblins. Of course, we have to get out of here, because there are definitely going to be more of them in this pit. Now now we're actually in the menu proper. And as you can see, we're all level 2, since we just leveled up. And you'll notice that beside each character's name you have the word Onion Kid there. That, for better or worse, is the default class of Final Fantasy III. We are the Onion Kids, or the Onion Knights, or the Onion Children. It's supposed to be Onion Knights, given the fact that we're all wearing knightly armor. Which is how they all were before the DS retcon. But, well, they changed it to freelancers, which is the basic default class in Final Fantasy III. Before we go into anything else, going to delve into why that is you'll notice above the save icon, we have the job keyword. We can't access it right now, but a little bit of a tidbit. This actually refers to the fact that we can actually customize our respective characters by changing their class. Although we'll get into the nuts and bolts of that much later. And, well, we can't save, because we're in a dungeon, obviously. And, yeah, we have no items, or in our backpacks, of course. We're all pretty much equipped with the same thing, a knife, cloth robes, essentially. We're not actually wearing armor, we're just playing make-believe. And we have a leather helmet. Yeah, as you can see, we all have that. And we have the whole front back row thing, which we can actually do in the main menu instead of having to go to another sub-menu in order to do that. Next up we have statuses, which go into a bit more detail. The way that MP works in Final Fantasy III has been changed again. They kind of brought back the spell charges from the original Final Fantasy, although you actually get a lot more of them in Final Fantasy III than you did in Final Fantasy I. And to get to level 3 of our respective class, well, we need 31 experience points, which we'll get in short order. Also, there is another experience number beneath our class name, and that is skill. We're currently skill 1. Skill relates to character classes in particular. The more you actually invoke the skills of that particular class, the higher your skill will go up, and that will be quite effective. But enough standing around. We need to get out of this cave right about now. And to either side of us we have treasure chests, which contains potions, which will be incredibly useful. Oh, the right one contains a potion, the left one contains a leather shield, which gives Luneth a little bit more defense. Now, you can actually dual wield in Final Fantasy III 2 weapons, similar to how it was in Final Fantasy II, but it's far more streamlined and more efficient in Final Fantasy III than it was in Final Fantasy II. On we go. And now that you mention it, there is something really strange about that rock. Well, the only thing to do is examine it and see what we can find. Maybe there's another item here. Or it could reveal the switch. There we go. There's another rock over here, which apparently opened another door somewhere. Another leather shield, which I'm going to give to Ark, because he took quite a bit of damage there. Probably going to have to use a potion to restore his health. But let's get out of that floor that we fell into, and we're in this area now. Just over here. And interesting item, a south wind, which is actually going to be fairly useful for when we get out of this cave. But we don't want to use it against the goblins. And 2 new enemies. The enemy at the top there is an Ifang, and the lower enemy is a carbuncle, apparently. They're much tougher than goblins, but fortunately there's only one of each, so okay, you did a bit of damage there, but Ark managed to defeat the carbuncle. Meanwhile, Refia and Ingus will double team that Ifang, fortunately, and Ark didn't get hit. Got some more experience and gil, and capacity. And another potion, just in case. and another encounter here. I will try to skip any repetitive battles if I can, because we're pretty much going to fight either goblins or more of these creatures. Victory for us. There's that snazzy victory fanfare yet again. So on we go, trying to get back to our village. Another potion. I want to go this way first, as there is an item nearby, but there is something about this spring. Now normally when you see odd-coloured water, your first instinctive should not be to drink from it. However, in this instance, we are going to drink from it. And the reason being, these springs restore our HP and MP, something that was sorely missing in the first two Final Fantasies. Something else that was also missing from the first two Final Fantasies is the fact that we can now auto-target enemies once they've been defeated. In Final Fantasy 1 and 2, whenever an enemy was killed and you were attacking that same enemy with another party member, that party member's attack would be considered useless. Not so in Final Fantasy 3. And just replenishing our health yet again. And another south wind. I think there's another treasure chest nearby in this direction. Or maybe the way out. Without further ado, let's get the hell out of here. Into this rather bizarre crystal place. Yep, a very familiar motif from the original Final Fantasy has reared its head yet again. And apparently something evil attacks us when we're in this room. That is completely and absolutely ungood. Lo and behold, it's boss time, and a very familiar enemy, the land turtle, which we encountered in Final Fantasy II. But fortunately we have these south winds, which we are definitely going to use because they're an offensive item. And they actually cause ice damage, or frost damage. Because otherwise that land turtle shell would be quite impervious to our attacks. 7 damage on Ingus. Not too bad. Arifia missed that attack, and now we're all pretty much going to try and stab this turtle with knives. I also really like the boss music of Final Fantasy III. In fact, to reiterate, all the music in Final Fantasy III is very catchy and iconic. Just goes to serve the fact that each chapter in the Final Fantasy meta series is self-contained, and that's what makes it so unique. And of course, Ark, the shyest of the four of us, managed to get the final blow. 500 gil, 31 capacity, and 33 experience, which means we're all now level 3. We're moving up in the world, yes we are. And wait a minute, there's a crystal here, and there are 4 of us. Oh yes, it's more than just the crystals that have returned in the plotline of Final Fantasy III. The crystal began to sparkle. Apparently we have been chosen. By which I mean Luneth, Ark, Refia and Ingus. Take the last of the light. The balance of everything is crumbling. When you take the light, you will be able to receive great strength from the crystals. You are the ones chosen to keep the hope. You must not let this world disappear. Light surrounded the 4. Magical light. And there is the crystal, shining magnificently. Welcome once again to Let's Play Final Fantasy III, released in 1990, 2 years after Final Fantasy II. And of course, since this is an emulation, we actually have, well, the people who translated this this ROM of Final Fantasy III. We also have the very iconic music that is very reminiscent from the original Final Fantasy as well, to signify that our journey has finally begun. Very iconic music. Now let these translation credits scroll. 4 stout-hearted warriors shall trudge forward and sweep away the darkness so that once again the crystal will shine with the light of hope. And of course, as with the previous Final Fantasies, we can go up through the magic cycle. This is where our quest begins. And this cycle will actually take us out of the cave that we've fallen into. Like so. And, well, we are now in the overworld of Final Fantasy III. And it is a good bit different from its predecessors, I will say that much. And now that we're in the overworld, we can finally save. There we go. All 3 of our characters, all level 3. And, well, with that, it is time to say that this is the conclusion of the first episode of Let's Play Final Fantasy III. And when we return, the 4 of us shall, or 5 including myself, but then again, it's not really my adventure, is it, adventurers? Anyway, in the next episode we shall descend from the cave down to the village and see what the villagers have to say about what has just transpired. As always, dear adventurers, until next we meet.